They look like small little rings, and what they do, similar to a potter's wheel, is they provide a centrifugal force. You can hang them and spin them, and they will wrap up your wool. They're used for actually spinning textiles and creating wool, which will then be woven into textiles. So we see these also during this period. So a number of different resources being used, craft production starting to take off in quite good fashion. So Hassuna culture and Samarran culture. Samarran culture emerges a bit to the south. You can see this is Hassuna, Samarra. And Samarran culture, again, named for the site of Samarra in which some of the pottery dating to this period was first found. But a much better site, a better type site, is a little bit to the south, Tel Sawan. You can see that unlike Hassuna culture is a bit earlier, and it exists to the north in this crescent of rain-fed agriculture. Here's the line that sort of differentiates between where the rains fall and where they don't. During the Samarran period, or Samarran culture, we see a shift to the south of this, and actually we begin to see evidence of irrigation. And this is quite important because now with irrigation we're going to be able to settle areas that we haven't been able to settle before. We'll be able to use river water. And again, these rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, are quite volatile. They're very difficult. But if you can create canals, if you can irrigate and begin to control them, now you have the ability to expand into territories that you haven't been able to expand into before. And that's what we see during the Samarran period with these sites. Here's Samarra again, and Tel Sawan. At Tel Sawan, we see again the use of mud brick architecture. Mud brick architecture in central Mesopotamia is introduced at this site. I want to say one other thing I forgot to mention too. The evidence of this agriculture and rather irrigation among the barley and emmer wheat that are being harvested at this time, the botanical remains from the sites include flax seeds. And flax seeds require a tremendous amount of water. And really, flax can't be grown without irrigation. So it's one of these discoveries that when we find it at a site, and it's not in a rain-fed context, it really is another type indicator of irrigation, that these people did have the ability to irrigate. And certainly the ability to build. We see this mud brick architecture from Tel Sawan, another site from Samarran culture's Chogamami nearby. And these structures are very, very interesting. We can see that they're very similar to one another in their layout. They're these T-shaped buildings with several rooms, and you can see again this sort of T shape. And the corners are buttressed. There are these large buttresses built onto each corner to support the walls. This has been looked at from a number of different perspectives. Why was this done? We saw last time the shift from round houses over to rectangular houses because they provide tremendous more support. These buttresses certainly do that, and in some cases appear to maybe have supported an upper level. The buildings themselves, the rooms, are never more than 3 meters across. If they're more than 3 meters across, they tend to be open courtyards. Why would you be limited to 3 meters? We see this pretty uniformly during this period, and actually later too. You really can't build walls that are more than 3, or rooms that are more than 3 meters across. Any thoughts as to why? Yeah?
They didn't know how to build something with structural support. 3 meters?
So structural support, right? So you've got, I think you're onto it. So you've got 3 meters apart, and what do you got to put on top of it, right? A roof, yeah. And so what are you going to make your roof out of? You could. We don't have the arch at this point, right? So we don't have mud brick arches yet. So actually, to cover your roofs, you have to rely on trees, and trees don't grow higher typically than 3 meters. So that's kind of our maximum length, right, that we're stuck with at this period. Later on, when we start exploiting those great trees in Lebanon, you'll see these rooms expand a bit. But for the periods that are dependent on roofing material, you're limited by the materials at hand. So we don't see them exceeding 3 meters at this point. This buttressing is very interesting, though. It also serves a decorative purpose, and I want you to keep it in mind because we're going to see it later. Buttressing and niche decorations on the outside of buildings becomes a hallmark of Mesopotamian architecture that we're going to see over and over and over again. This is the first time we see it. At Tel Aswan, we also have 100 different graves discovered under these houses. More intramural burials, meaning that the burials are inside the house as opposed to in an external cemetery. And with them, we find a number of very interesting finds. The carving of alabaster, calcite, these calcite vessels and figurines are found at Tel Aswan. And they're very, very interesting. Do they remind you of anything that we might have seen before? Especially these figurines. Maybe something we saw yesterday? Or not yesterday, I'm sorry, on Monday? Right, okay, well, I'll take you back. Right, we were looking at this plastered statue from Ain Ghazal, which again is almost 1,000 years before. And the similarities are striking. They're different materials, but the composition, the focus on the eyes and the inlay is quite striking. We're going to see these, especially the focus of these eyes again and again and again as we get to these later periods too. So just keep these traits in mind. We're starting to build a repertoire of tradition that we're going to see in architecture and art that'll continue on. These figures are interesting too. Often they're sexed. We can tell if they're male or if they're female. This one most likely is female. You can see these stylized breasts, and then also, right, the pubic triangle, which sort of identifies her as a she. We'll see some male ones a little bit later on. But these pieces are very, very interesting, and also with Samarran culture, we see an explosion in pottery types. You can see those early types that we looked at before. With Samarra, we see pottery moving from a utilitarian item more to a luxury item. These very, very fine platters which have all sorts of different iconography. Right? This is a stylized gazelle with his horns coming out of the back. We see fish, we see these wonderful motifs, these geometric motifs, and these plates and the Samarran type pottery actually is traded over long distances. There's a lot of value. It's held to be very valuable. In fact, we can see just looking at this piece, some of this. This piece actually has 2 holes that are drilled into the bottom. Why might you think that is? Why would there be 2 holes drilled into the bottom of this platter, right here? Oops. Kind of takes away some of the function of it, right? If you were gonna keep, say, a liquid in this, certainly those holes aren't very useful. Any thoughts? Yeah. Maybe for draining, yeah. Although we might see more holes. We're going to see strainers later on, and they often are perforated with multiple holes. In this case, it's just 2 little holes side by side. Any other thoughts? What's going between them? Did you have any?
I don't know, like in Native American cultures, I know a lot of times it's to drill holes in it to like let the spirits out. So.
That's actually, we're gonna see items that are ritually destroyed, cultic items that does exactly that, right? There's this sort of release of power, release of spirits, and things like that. In fact, those plastered figurines at Catalhook are systematically destroyed, the faces and the hands, in some sort of ritual kind of, taking apart, desacralization, perhaps. But in this case, not so much. Anybody else? I think you can figure it out if you look at it. All the evidence is right there before you. What else is going on here? You've got these 2 holes. Yeah?
Well, there's 2 holes on the side right over there, on the bottom left.
These guys, yeah.
No, there's some on the side of the bowl, like the rim.
On the side of the bowl. Actually, I hadn't noticed that, but you're absolutely right. There are another two there. There are another two here. Absolutely right. And actually, now that you bring that up, and I had never noticed that before, thank you, you can see that they're in a line, right? Here, here, and here, which gives you a little bit more information about what this is used for.
Use it to like weave yarn or anything?
Well, there definitely was, there was yarn going through them, and the reason for it is, and just to kind of move on, it's actually a repair. So this vessel was broken in antiquity, right? You can see the crack. We think of this, you know, sort of reconstruction, these cracks being something, you know, that came after the use of this vessel. But these vessels were so coveted and so, you know, appreciated in their time that this vessel broke, and in antiquity, it was repaired. They actually drilled holes here, and as you pointed out, here and here, and actually stitched the vessel back together again in the past. So it gives you a sense of how much these things were valued, that at this time they're very much luxury items. And you can see the amount of work that goes into them. Thank you for pointing that out. So moving on from Samarran culture, we see the emergence of, at the site of Tel Halaf, a new series of developments in northern Mesopotamia and North Syria around 6,500 BCE. And these developments end up replacing Hassuna culture in the north with what we call Halaf culture. And again, Halaf culture relates to the site of Tel Halaf, where some of the pottery from this period was found. But a much better site for understanding Halaf culture comes from Arpachia in Assyria. And this is interesting because you can see the spread, the much larger spread of territory in which we see these different developments, artistic styles and pottery, types of architecture, which we'll look at in a moment. And not only is it great in geographic breadth, but also in time. This period, for about 600 years, dominates North Syria and Mesopotamia. It's interesting in the sense that, unlike some of these earlier periods where we're naming an entire culture off of a specific pottery type, which we said was problematic last time we talked about why, with Halaf culture we see the emergence of different types of traits that go with one another. For example, specific types of houses. These are very interesting. There's a shift away from rectangular houses back to these circular rectangular structures, which are known as tholoi or tholos houses. Here's a reconstruction of one. And this one is actually incorrect. It's another, we're going to see lots of incorrect things. These structures were actually entered through the round side and not through the end side. It was thought for some time that these were temples. There were only about 2 per site. Most likely they served as common areas, public houses. These buildings probably had multiple purposes at different times, but they are monumental. They're very large and very, very unique and very, sort of typical of Halaf culture. We see as we move along now in 6000, the emergence of a few new things as well. The stamp seal becomes quite common. And the stamp seal is used for the sealing of vessels, documents. We're going to see stamp seals and cylinder seals particularly from this point on become very, very important. And these are markers, again, of authority and evidence of bureaucracy. Now you have, personal possessions that need to be kept track of. You need to have a mark that can identify what is what and where it should go and who should use it. So